Welcome back to the Rock Your Retirement Show. I'm your host, Kathy Klein, and today we have two co-hosts in this series on living overseas. If you've considered living overseas, you must listen to this series. If you didn't listen to last week's show, you might want to head over there and listen to that episode first. This series might make more sense if you listen to them in order. In last week's episode, we spoke about what happened to my two co-hosts and why they moved overseas and why they help others do the same. Today, we're talking about the 5 things you must do before you pack your bags to live overseas. And next week, we'll talk about how to decide where to retire. Many of us want a place where we can not only afford to live, but also where we have our tribe that we can be friends with. We'll discuss where Americans and Canadians are retiring and other English-speaking people and why. Finally, in the 4th episode, we'll discuss one particular country, Ecuador, and why my husband and I had considered that and why my co-hosts actually decided to move there. So you haven't saved enough money, or you might have a friend who hasn't saved enough, or maybe you like the slower lifestyle that an out of the US retirement brings. If any of these situations are yours, then this series is for you. My guests are a power couple when it comes to living overseas. Not only have they written hundreds of articles on the subject, but they also have 3 best-selling Amazon books and a course for people who want to dive deeper on the subject. But before we start, I wanted to tell you that this episode is brought to you by the Medicare Quick Step-by-Step Guide for signing up for Medicare. If you're signing up for Medicare for the first time, you already know how confusing it can be. This step-by-step guide is absolutely free and will help you easily make the transition into Medicare. Get it free at medicarequick.com/checklist. Okay, I'm not going to make you wait any longer. Let's go ahead and bring on Ed and Cynthia Staten. Thanks so much for coming on the show again, especially after all of the technical difficulties we had last week. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kathy, for having us. We are happy to be here.
Sometimes technical issues happen, and thanks for continuing, even though we had such a difficult time. So today we're going to be talking about what you need to do before you make that move. Now, I had something similar when I was talking to Les and I moved from San Diego all the way to South Carolina. And I had a checklist that I worked off of. And let me tell you, now that I'm here in South Carolina, there were some things I didn't put on the checklist. So tell me, what are some things that people need to think about before they move, not just across the country, but to a new country? What are some things they need to think about?
Well, I certainly, there's the language issue. If they aren't interested in learning anything from another language, then they need to look at places that have a lot of English speakers.
Or there is one country that I'm thinking of that's all English.
Yes.
Yeah, Belize, right.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. So that's certainly a country we point out to people when the language issue is important to them. But certainly there's a lot of English all over the world, and certainly there are apps and that you can get to help you, classes, that sort of thing. So it's not as big of an obstacle as maybe some people would think.
So I have to tell you a story about an English-speaking country.
Okay.
So my husband and I, in August of 2019, went for a 3-week vacation in England, a little city called Wigan.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a friend who is in San Diego, and he said, "Oh, you're going to Wigan, are you?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "You're not going to be able to understand anything those people say." He says, "People who live in England can't understand people who live in Wigan."
That's funny.
And he was right. Most of the time, I had a really hard time understanding what they were saying. So just because it's an English-speaking country
That's right.
doesn't mean you're going to be able to understand their version of English.
Well, even that's true, Kathy, in the States, and you probably realize this if you move from San Diego to South Carolina, you
Yes.
maybe experience some of that yourself.
Yes, I have. And like there are some sayings that I didn't understand, like bless your heart. That's not really a compliment.
Oh, yes. No, it's more of an empathetic, I'm sorry.
You dumb, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, I
Right,
get it.
right.
In the South, they can insult you with a smile and
Oh,
it's
of
fine.
course.
But
Well,
yeah,
Ed and I both grew up in the South, so we can talk about that on another show.
but that's an option too. I mean, there are some similarities to moving overseas, moving from one part of the country to another. I would say the things that you need to think about are probably similar.
Well, yeah, and even we living in Ecuador, we live in the highlands, and that's where Cuenca is. But on the coast, the people that live on the coast, sometimes Ecuadorians that live in the highlands can't understand people on the coast. So it's no different.
Right. People from New York can't understand people from South Carolina.
That's right. That's right.
Psychologically as well as linguistically.
It's true. The culture, you're going to have a culture shock. So is that on your list? Be aware of the culture shock?
Well, I mean, if you're not aware of that, then you need to back up a little bit because well, I say that, but here's one of the number one mistakes that people make that causes expat life to go wrong. And that is that they think that moving abroad is going to be just a cheaper North America.
Right.
And it's the cheaper part is right, unless you move to, Switzerland or something like that. It's just the biggest mistake. And we had talked previously about people moving before off the air, actually, about people saying, why don't they learn English? And they're talking about people moving to the United States.
Well, why didn't you learn Spanish?
Well, we know enough to get by, but there are expats we've heard say, why don't these people learn English?
Oh, that's funny.
In Ecuador, it's like, because that's not their language. I don't know.
Because you're
Maybe
in their country, not the other way around. That's hysterical that people.
Yeah, kind of wrap up this whole language thing, and then we can move on to the other things that you need to think about. Is that being functional is great, and that doesn't take a lot. But signing up for classes and not necessarily before you move abroad, but once you get there, because it gives you an opportunity to make friends. First of all, suddenly you have something in common with these people sitting next to you. You're trying to learn a little bit of Spanish, and these may be, end up being your besties. So who knows? It's a good thing to do once you move and get settled. Find a language class, but find one that's definitely conversational.
Right. Don't learn all the medical terminologies that you don't.
Or conjugating verbs. That's not necessary, and it's kind of gets in the way. People get so bogged down that they just say, "Oh, I can't do this," and they quit. And you don't need to be able to speak in the subjunctive tense. Isn't that something that we speak in English? I'm not sure.
As long as you can get your message across, it's fine, right?
Yeah, because the locals appreciate so much your effort, even if it's horrible, and they'll do whatever they can to help you in any way they can.
Unless you're in France.
Well,
okay, if you're in France, I'm sorry, I'm making fun of you, but that's what we've heard, is that French people don't like it unless you speak perfect French to don't even bother. That's what we've heard.
Well,
maybe.
I don't know.
All right. So the second thing you got to do or think about is the money situation, your finances. A lot of people, if you're comfortable still writing checks and going and handing the lady the deposit at the bank and all that sort of thing, you kind of need to get over that.
Because people still do that?
Well, Ed, do have a local bank account in Ecuador, and Ed will go to the bank occasionally and make deposits. But Typically you need to get most of your financial life online if you don't already have it online.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's a common misconception. Well, there's lots of misconceptions, but one is that you have trouble getting your Social Security if you live out of the country.
Direct
That's not the
deposit.
case. Most of our friends and what we do personally is maintain a U.S. banking relationship and then just pull money out of ATMs.
They're everywhere.
But if you don't want to do that, almost any country, not every bank in every country, but there are banks in just about every country that will accept your Social Security if you want to do everything locally. Like Cynthia said, we do have a local bank account. A lot of people don't even do that. But we do it so that we can have the few bills that we have paid automatically, deducted, instead of us having to go over here and pay this bill and go across town and pay that bill. I did that for the first few months and I was like, what the heck am I doing?
So can you, in where you live, can you have your local bills automatically paid, or do you have to go stand in line?
No, I mean, our internet bill comes out automatically, our water bill, our electric bill.
Our health insurance comes out every month.
Actually, that's all the bills. Now I think of it.
That's great. Okay, so you don't have to, there's not going to be that culture shock where you can't have automated bills. What about credit cards? Because I rarely carry cash. I typically use my credit card for everything. I love getting airline points. How is that? Do most of the restaurants don't take them? When we went to, what country was that? Can't remember the name of it, but it was a third world country. I think it starts with a C, where they have monkeys and things like that. We had to pay cash.
Costa Rica? Are you talking about Costa Rica?
Yeah, we went to Costa Rica.
Okay.
And we had to pay cash for everything. They didn't take most of the small stores, they didn't.
You know what? That's a great point, because there are a lot of little, like we call them mom and pop restaurants, stores. And so if you are used to always using a credit card for every single thing, I mean, even your, cup of coffee in the morning, that's something you need to ask about. Definitely the taxi driver, you're going to want to keep change, like small change, because the large bills, now here in Ecuador, they use the US dollar, so that's great.
They do?
Yes, we don't have to do the conversion to the local currency, but still you have to be aware that they don't keep a lot of change on hand. So it's your responsibility, even though you think it should be theirs, for you to do that. And it's not uncommon. I mean, just the other day, I was getting a manicure and pedicure, and the woman, when I got ready to pay, she didn't have enough change I was going to give her 20. I mean, it's less than $20. She had to run next door and get change. I mean, but that happens all the time.
So basically you have to carry a lot of singles, like you used to work at a strip club or something.
Yeah. Think of it like that.
You always have a lot of singles with you.
What you described with your Costa Rican experience in our life, you described a tourist mentality. When you live someplace, you don't use credit cards because that just doesn't make sense. You're going to get charged an international transaction fee. Why? When you can just pull it out of pull it out of an ATM. So the money thing, like I said, get it all online. So if we're going to get through this, we can't blow through these 5 topics.
Well, we'll do what we can. We don't have to rush. We don't have to rush. We're good.
All right. But the next one that we had was about. No.
I just wanted to say, to wrap up the whole money part, unless you have a question. One of the reasons we maintain a bank account in the States is that's for credit cards, especially for airline tickets. We use our credit card because that's just a smarter way to book those tickets and everything. And so our credit cards aren't local credit cards, they're credit cards from the States.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point that out.
And Ed, my credit cards don't have foreign transaction fees. So personally, I wouldn't have to worry about that. And by the way, I use my credit cards even for a cup of coffee.
I know.
But I do understand that that is not customary in other countries. And so when I do travel to other countries, I do carry some cash for the merchants that don't. I mean, if you're not in a touristy area, usually the merchants aren't going to accept credit cards because
Right.
they don't want to pay the fee, they don't want to set it up for
Exactly.
whatever reason.
Well, and Kathy, conversely, when we're in the States like we are right now, when I go to a grocery store or something and pull out money,
People
the
behind you are
cashier
mad.
looks at me like, what's that stuff? It's
Yeah.
so it works both ways in that regard.
Absolutely, it does. Yes, I completely agree. Okay, so we've talked about language. We've talked about money a little bit, credit cards. What are some other things to think about?
Well, you got to get a visa when you
Is that
move
like
to
instead
the,
of a MasterCard?
yeah. Funny thing about that, a big card for us, just as an aside, in Ecuador that we didn't even know existed anymore is Diners Club.
Oh my gosh, aren't those really expensive?
I
Oh
don't
my
know,
God.
but that was the main card when we got there. Like, really? We didn't even know that
Wow.
exists anymore. But no, when you get off the plane, people think, oh, another misconception, by moving abroad, you're going to like have to give up your citizenship in the States. Nothing could be further from the truth. You can choose to, and some people do, but that's not necessary. And when you get off the plane, like we did and everybody else does to start with, you're just a tourist to start with. You've got to go through a formal process of applying for permanent residency.
Otherwise, you're an illegal, you're an illegal.
Yeah, and then,
Don't want to do that.
yeah, there's enough talk about that in the
Don't
United
go
States.
there.
You don't want to be that person.
No, we're not going to talk about that. But yeah, so you do. You have, there's certain paperwork, an application process, the whole thing. And each country has its own, obviously, rules. And so once you decide your country, then you start looking into what the requirements are for a residence.
To
And
live there, not necessarily become a citizen.
Exactly.
yeah, we're not citizens. We could be. We just haven't chosen to apply for citizenship in Ecuador because it just hasn't been a
You don't need
priority.
to. You don't need
No,
No,
to
not
do
we
really.
it.
can be a permanent resident. Well, our visa and our passport is indefinitely. So unless we do something really terrible and get deported, we are permanent residents of Ecuador.
When we were looking at the possibility of moving overseas, one of the things that we read, because I did a lot of reading, I signed up for international living and, did all that, which I'm sure you did too.
Uh-huh.
Was that at the time, and I don't know if that's changed, is that it can be really difficult to go through that paperwork because it seems like everything was kind of disorganized. And if you went to one place, you did it this way, but if you went to another place in the same country, they did it a different way. Did you find that to be the case 10 years ago when you moved?
It's still true today. But
Okay.
but doing this particular thing especially is not a do-it-yourself project. You really need to spend the little bit of money that it costs to hire an immigration attorney in the country that you're going to and let them do their thing, because you can fall into a black hole and never come out as far as the just the paperwork. It does vary from place to place. It varies from person to person. Sometimes it feels like, depending on what mood they're in. So they all get to do their own interpretation, and that's why you just want to let someone who knows the ropes do this for you.
Well, and because too, the laws often change from one internet post to another. If you're trying to do this online, you don't know if you're talking to someone that actually has the most up-to-date information, and you're most likely dealing with paperwork in a different language. And so, yes, when we say hire a visa attorney, that is some of the best advice we can give.
Because you can't go and say, why don't you have these forms in English?
That's right, you can't.
Okay, that makes total sense to hire somebody to assist you with the process. When you first moved, how long was that tourist visa?
At
90
that time, it
days.
lasted for 90 days. So you
Yeah.
need to show up with your paperwork pretty much in hand. It's really a pain in the rear end to try to be dealing long distance with FedEx, and
Yeah.
expensive to deal with FedEx if you don't have things right. You've got to get things apostilled, which is a word that most people have never even heard of.
I've never
It's
heard
a
of it.
it's a way for the state, well, to be recognized as an official document. You have to send
Yeah,
things to the state government and they put a seal on it.
it's an authentication process, but we don't want to get into
Yeah,
all those
that's
details with your audience right now. But the process is like, for instance, if you were thinking about retiring to Cuenca like we did, you would first take a scouting trip. You would certainly travel to the places within the country within your 90 days. And if you decided that this is the place that you want to live, then you would, during the time you're there, maybe make an appointment with a visa attorney, find out everything you would need to gather when you go back home, and then begin to do that, and set yourself a time frame for when you wanted to accomplish having all your documents together. And certainly you could send them to the visa attorney without having to show up in person. So depending on your own personal time frame, that would determine when you do what. Does that make sense?
Yeah, have you ever heard of anybody just moving to the country without even being there first? They just read about it and they're like, oh, I read about it. I think I'll move there.
we
Yes.
know.
Yes, we have.
How long did that last?
Not long. No, sometimes actually and again, this is very personal. If that person had very limited financial resources and one trip was it, and they did the research and they said, you know what, I'm going to make this work because I need to make this work. And they did. So we've heard the success stories too.
Okay, well, that's good. But in general, you don't recommend that.
No.
Of course not. No.
No.
Check out the country, check it out first.
Yeah, we tell people don't even believe what we tell you. You know?
Well, there's a thing, and women, I think, are kind of tuned into this maybe a little bit more than men, called intuition. And sometimes you just know by your gut feeling if something's right or it's not. Sometimes you can't even explain it.
Right.
So
You just
you
kind
got to
of.
show up and trust your gut.
And then once you've shown up and you think you like it, then what? You come back for another 90 days, or what happens? You come in, you do a 3-month trip, check it out, scope it out, find out where you want to live. Or if you want to live there, and then what's next? You go home.
Well, it depends on the country. So yeah, I mean, for Ecuador, for instance, if you come and within that 90 days, you know that this is the place for you, and your time frame, you want to say move there 6 months later or even 3 months later, you apply for an extension so that you can come back into the country as a tourist. And then you bring everything with you, your documents. So that is very country specific as far as how many times you can come back into the country on your tourist visa before you actually apply for residency.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I have heard that in other countries there are benefits that you get for being a certain age, or for having a certain amount of money in the bank, or for whatever. I don't know if you're prepared to talk about any of that.
Sure. Yeah.
That's for sure true. I mean,
Ed can talk about those benefits for somebody, we call it terceira in their third age.
And it doesn't have to be specific to Cuenca, because remember, we're still going to talk about Ecuador in the last.
Well, yeah, a lot of countries actually have programs for us older people.
Yeah, Panama is well known for its pensionista program as far as extra discounts and so forth and so on for people who are tercera edad. Tercera is third and edad is age. So you're not old people, and it's a respectful thing. It's not an over the hill and out to pasture and all that sort of stuff. And our country in Ecuador, We get, if you own your home, you get half price utilities. You
Oh,
get,
that's nice.
yeah, but it doesn't, the utilities are so cheap anyway. We don't
It
have
doesn't
heating and
matter.
air conditioning, so our electric bill's like $30 a month. We get discounted airfare, which does make a difference.
You get discounted airfare?
Yeah, if
Yeah.
you originate the flight in Ecuador, like we book our flights from Ecuador, we get discounts.
Because of your age or because you have money in the bank or both?
No, it's because of the
Age.
age.
That's
There's
nice.
Yeah.
there's no discounts in Ecuador for putting money in the bank. There, that's more in Malaysia.
What's
You
the
have to
age? What's the cutoff age for
65.
so for most of the countries in, say, Latin America, it's 65 is when your benefits begin.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not like AARP when they start sending things when
50.
you're 50.
Well, I got my first AARP invitation when I was in my 30s. I was not happy.
It's like, wow, that was a bad picture.
I know, that's what I was thinking. Anyway, so 65 is typically the age when you can start receiving some kind of benefit for living in a Latin country.
Yeah, and something I thought was kind of silly, but I've come to really enjoy is that we get our own lines
We get to cut in line.
at the bank and the grocery store and all that kind of stuff,
Well,
and it's kind of cool.
Well, even getting on the plane, I mean, we get to cut in line.
Yeah, we get on before the first class people do.
Wow, that's nice.
Right.
Now I'm not 65. Will they take me just because I look old, or do I have to show my driver's license?
Well, I would suggest getting a collapsible cane.
Okay.
It might help with the image a little bit.
That's right. So just like they've done in the US with the service dogs, we'll ruin it for you guys too by faking our age. So we've got benefits that we don't necessarily have. That's a good thing. But what are some other things that we need to consider before packing our bags and just getting on a plane and moving?
Well, health insurance is a biggie. One is because Medicare, while citizenship is fine, and Social Security is fine, Medicare doesn't travel beyond the US borders.
No, it does not.
So you've got to think about that. And your choices are threefold, I guess. You can get a private policy. You can, once you're a permanent resident in many countries, you can qualify for whatever the national health care program is in that country. Or because it's so cheap, you can simply choose to pay out of pocket for care within the country. We maintain our Medicare benefits for two reasons. One, because as is now, we're in the United States, and the Ecuador benefits we have also don't travel outside the country. And also because you never know about what forever means. Just because we live in Ecuador now doesn't mean we're going to live in Ecuador forever. And the opt-in charge to opt out of Medicare and then go back in, this is your world.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not cheap. And if you moved out of the country because you didn't have a ton of money, then you probably don't have a ton of money when you come back
To pay the penalty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in our case, we're part of the Ecuador national health care system. We have 100% coverage, zero deductible, no restrictions for age or pre-existing condition.
That's nice.
And our monthly premiums for both of us combined is $81.
Wow, that's awesome.
Giddy up. It is
Well, so
awesome.
we do all of those things. So we have Medicare, we have Ecuador National Health Insurance, and we also pay out of pocket for some things. Like we just had some dental work done and we pay out of pocket for that. I have an ophthalmologist that I really like. I've had cataract and surgery and lens replacement, so I had him do that because I could afford to pay for it out of pocket. It wasn't over the top expensive.
But in the US, that would probably be cost prohibitive to just pay out of pocket for cataract.
Exactly.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I had a crown replaced, a veneer put on, and cosmetic filling, and all of it was $250.
Wow. And there we have the medical travel. Why people travel overseas to get their medical done.
Sure,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
This medical tourism thing is not a new idea, and it's all true. So
Right.
yeah, we do all three. We found that a hybrid works best for us, but everyone has to make their own decisions about that. The great news, Kathy, is that specifically regarding dental, a lot of people put that off because it's so expensive.
And
It's
And
not
when,
covered.
yeah, and not covered. And when they move abroad, they can actually get some stuff done that should have been done a long time ago, but better late than never.
That's nice. Yeah, I have a lot of people contacting me because they need implants,
Uh-huh.
dental implants. Do they do that where you are?
Oh,
Sure,
sure.
they do
Oh,
all
yeah.
that, anything.
Hmm. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. And I've heard that a lot of these doctors and dentists, maybe not dentists, but a lot of the doctors actually train in the US.
Well, they
And
train all over the world. And so that, even though we have medical schools here in Ecuador, in Cuenca, I think there are 7 universities. They're not all medical, but typically doctors do, for some of their training, go to other places, and for continuing training, they go outside of the country. I know our dentist recently got back from Germany. He went to a conference and was teaching things that he does in Ecuador, and so yeah, they do go all over to train.
wow, that's nice. That's nice. So, anything else that we should be discussing about what you really need to think about before you pack your bags and move overseas?
Well, a real big one is like
Where are you
where
going
you're
to
going
live?
to live when you get there.
Right.
we
Yes.
we very, very, very much recommend renting first, even if you plan to eventually buy a place. It's just, I mean, anybody that's had any experience with Airbnb or one of those places knows that sometimes the pictures aren't quite the same as the real life experience. So to do something as radical as moving to a new country, you really need to have boots on the ground and get familiar with not just where you are, but within where you are.
Yeah,
And different
different neighborhoods.
neighborhoods have a different vibe and a different feel, and you can't know that over the internet. You need to just be there for a while.
That makes
And in
total
our
sense.
case, we've chosen to continue to rent because rents are so disproportionately cheap compared to purchases for some reason. And we instead have invested a lot of our money in 1-year CDs that pay an incredibly high interest rate. So that's made more sense for us than hoping the housing market rises. We know exactly what we're going to be getting every year from our 1-year CD. But the good news is, just to let you know, we mentioned in the first episode, we live in a 2-story penthouse apartment that's almost 3,000 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, and our rent's $700 a month.
That's nice. Very nice.
Mhm.
So that's how we can do a $2,000 budget and live in a place like that and still do all the other lovely things that we do to have a nice life.
And then when you're tired of going up and down the stairs, you can just move out.
Well, yeah.
Yes, we can.
And
We
if something
can.
goes wrong, we tell the landlord.
Well, and we know people over the years that have decided to move on to other countries and move to, even if they stayed in Ecuador, maybe move to the coast for a while, move out to the country. And so the fact is that people, no matter where they live, they just move. People
Right.
move.
Right, especially if you're adventurous enough to move overseas,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and once
That's
you've
sort
done
of,
it the first time and not only survived, but found out probably it wasn't as hard or as bad as you had made it up in your mind to be when you were considering it, then you're like, well, this place is great, but I'm not getting any younger. Why don't we try blah, blah, blah?
exactly. That makes perfect sense, actually. You know, if you're adventurous enough to move overseas, you might be adventurous enough to move again once you're there. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So next week, we're going to be talking about the different countries that most US retirees are moving to and still collecting their Social Security benefits. I'm really excited about that. What about you? I'm sure that before you moved, you did a lot of research on different countries, correct?
We actually kind of worked off of our wish list. We did look at some other countries, and found out that a number of these countries we were looking at did not check all our boxes. So we were really driven by our list and what we were looking for, and that eliminated a lot of countries.
Well, I am so excited to hear more about that. Before we go today, do you want to tell our listener how to reach you and maybe a little bit about your course?
Okay, Ed, you want to do
Sure.
that?
Well, the website is basically our name, www.edandcynthia.com. Ed spelled with 2 D's, but if you spell with 1, it'll still redirect to the website. And our program is called Retirement Reimagined. And it's a step-by-step, very systematic approach to going from wherever you are right now, even if you don't have a passport, all the way to getting off the plane in the country that you have chosen for yourself based on the steps that we take you through to figure out which one is your ideal relocation spot. And everything in between as far as things we've been talking about with visas and how to get your stuff online, even down to remembering to renew your driver's license and library card before you leave.
That sounds great. That sounds great. And all of that can be found at edandcynthia.com.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. Great.
As well as links to our 3 books.
Right. Yes. Well, I am looking forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show again. Greatly
We had a blast.
Thank you, Kathy.
For our listener, we'll see you next time on Rock Your Retirement. Bye.
Bye.